programming on that end of the county. Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming. I think that it's time to start. We may have some people live on YouTube. We can't see you, but thank you for being here. Today we have Mike Lawrence with us. He is a graphic novelist who lives in Portland with his family, but he did graduate from Enterprise High School, and he will be in the upcoming Wishart. Some of his work will be in the upcoming exhibit here that opens May 26th. Wishart, for Gary and Larry Wishart, the former art teachers in Enterprise School. Mike is a illustrator and graphic novelist, and we have him here. So thanks, Mike. Are you there?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm currently a cartoonist, and for my talk, I was going to talk, kind of go over how I became a professional cartoonist, starting with what I did after graduation from Enterprise, and then to now, kind of a quick overview. After graduating from Enterprise, I attended the University of Oregon to go to art school, and by then I was still painting mostly, but in art school, they didn't really like illustrators that much until I discovered the printmaking program. And so I dropped painting at that point. And I guess let me get my slide going here to show what I'm doing.
Yes, we should see the slide in 1 minute.
You can share a screen.
Oh.
Did that work?
Yep, we got it.
Yeah, printmaking. So at U of O, there was a wonderful printmaking professor named Margaret Prentice, and she loved illustration. And printmaking has such a huge history of illustrating books, and so I just became obsessed with it. And drawing whimsical stuff and drawing fantasy and genre stuff, which I love doing, was really embraced in that program and kind of celebrated. And so, I had a lot of early success with prints. I started selling work almost immediately after I switched to woodcuts. And so this one is it's actually a painting I did in Gary's class in maybe 97. I did a watercolor of this. And then I think for the class, I needed to come up with an image so I could have my print turned in on time. So I decided to redo the image and carve it. And then let's see. So this is a woodcut. And then this is going to be in the Gary show. This is an engraving. It's slightly different than a woodcut, but the same idea. You're basically making a really complicated stamp and running it through a printing press. And you guys have a press there, don't you?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and so for 3 years, I primarily focused on printmaking, thinking that I would eventually get into doing children's books. Entered an illustration contest, and this was one of my winning thing for it. And so that was my very first, I think it's my very first published image. And it was like a fantasy anthology, which I didn't know, but it turned out to be like a whole Scientology thing. But I didn't understand that until they flew me down to Hollywood, and I was down there for a week workshop, and it was this whole Scientology thing. But it was, I'll tell the story there in person, but it was actually a great experience. I was there with a bunch of illustrators, and we attended weekly workshops, and then there was this big fancy award show at the end of it. But that was my first publishing cred. I think this is the last print I did, maybe. After graduating from U of O, it was kind of hard to have access to a printing press. And it's such a time-consuming way to make an image. I love doing it. But so I probably haven't pulled a print in 20 years, which kind of makes me sad. But it was just access to the facilities and just the amount of time it takes while also, working full time. But after school, I started to really start focusing on trying to get into picture books. And so I transitioned back to painting, and then also started teaching myself how to work digitally. So the image on the left is a watercolor. The image on the right was drawn in pencil and then colored in Photoshop. And it's probably one of my early successes in coloring in Photoshop. And I used a really limited palette because I don't know, I really struggled with transition to digital, but that's kind of where a lot of professional illustration takes place, is with digital. It's just faster and it's easier to edit. What do I have here? And then this is watercolor, but then also kind of edited a little bit digitally. So this was me kind of still learning and still hoping to jump into children's picture books. And this was a story idea I had that didn't really go anywhere because at this point I had no writing experience outside of high school writing, and really struggled with that. And then after doing that, I started playing around with charcoal a lot. I still loved black and white imagery. And when I was a kid, I loved the work of Chris Van Allsburg, who did Jumanji and all sorts of wonderful picture books that were all black and white with this really soft charcoal. I'm pretty sure it's charcoal. And so I started experimenting with charcoal and did this image and just absolutely loved it. This is actually quite big because charcoal lines are kind of fuzzy. I can't remember, I sold this piece, but if I remember right, this is like maybe like 2 feet by 3 feet. But I got a lot of crisp lines in it. I think the lighting really turned out well. And I got really, like kind of like with printmaking, I got obsessed with working in charcoal. And around this time, I had been submitting to publishers for children's book work and just getting rejected constantly. And so I, around this time, started reading comic books again. And I read them as a kid. And when I lived in Enterprise, I kind of stopped. There was no comic book store there. Like sometimes Safeway may have had some, but I think even then they might have been gone. So I kind of got out of the habit of comics, but I rediscovered comics and decided to do a comic book in charcoal, thinking that it would kind of differentiate me from traditional comic book art. And this is the cover of a self-published comic I did called The Salamander King. And so this is the cover of it, which I still really like. It's old work, but I still think it turned out really nice. And then this is what the interiors look like. And this was me trying to like really learn how to make comics, kind of self-teaching, self-taught, of learning my writing and pacing, and also just the process of making comics. So I made this book and I self-published it, and I started going to local comic book shows. And it was at a show in Portland where I met a local writer named Elizabeth Rush, who had been working in children's books and wanted to move over into comics, or she had an idea for a graphic novel for kids and was looking for an artist. And she really liked how different my artwork was compared to everyone else there. And so we agreed to start collaborating. And it started out called Muddy Boy. It was a story that she would tell her kid about a kid who got superpowers when he got muddy. Eventually that became Muddy Max as we were kind of working on the story. And she primarily did, I would say she did 99% of the writing, but she did let me include some of my own ideas in there. And the main thing about working on Muddy Max is that I learned how to write professionally by working with her, watching how she developed her ideas, reading what she was coming up with character development and structuring her story. And yeah, so this is the cover for Muddy Max. And even this, I can't remember how many times this got rejected. I think it took like 4 years of rejections before Andrews McNeil bought it. And the interior of that book was all drawn digitally. and the publisher wanted a limited color palette, I think for printing costs, if I remember correctly. This was 10 years ago, so my memory's a little fuzzy. So this is actually just brown and black ink only when it's printed, and just different like halftones and stuff used to try to get as much depth out of the image. And so, yeah, I decided to do the book digitally because I had to go fast. I was also a new dad. And so drawing with traditional materials just wasn't going to work, since I had I think I got the final script for Muddy Max the same week that my second kid was born. And so this whole book was drawn with an infant strapped to my chest and a toddler at my feet. And it was just a really rough year, and I honestly don't remember a whole lot of it. But I think I drew the book in about 10 months, which is just an insane pace. I don't do that anymore. But I really wanted to prove that I could do it, since this was my first book. I wanted to get that publishing credit so that it'd be easier to find new jobs. And so, yeah, while I was working on Muddy Max, towards the end of it, I had the beginning of an idea. And I talked to by this point, I had a literary agent that I was working with, and she convinced me that I should try writing and illustrating my books, which I was still feeling really self-conscious about, since I knew I could draw, but I didn't know I could write. But I had this idea about scouting and space. At the time, as a new dad, and I was thinking about my own scouting experience, which was Cub Scouts, which was incredibly disappointing. We never went outside. I think we stayed in the school cafeteria the entire year. We never got to go on any adventures or camping or anything that I loved doing with my family. We would do camping and fishing and hiking and all sorts of stuff, but scouting never did any of that. And also around that time, the space shuttle was decommissioned. I grew up in an Air Force town in Southern California, and that was the alternate landing place for the space shuttle. And so I grew up loving the space program and just airplanes in general. And so I was kind of sad about the space shuttle, and I was thinking about scouting. And combining those two ideas became the Star Scout series of what if I can make scouting as exciting as I had hoped it would be. And so, yeah, I was, Muddy Max, when we were pitching that, it took years of rejections. And when I put together my pitch for Star Scouts, I think I had multiple offers in the first week, which was really exciting. It gave me a big confidence boost that I could write. But then it also scared me, because then all of a sudden I actually had to write the whole book. When I do pitches for graphic novels, you don't make the whole book first, because it takes too long they're too labor intensive to do it that way. And so my pitch is like a 1 or 2 page story that's just the bare bones plot elements, and then a 20-page art sample. And that's what a publisher would buy the book off of. So they liked my 1 or 2 page story and my art. And then I had to sit down and actually write a 200-page graphic novel. Yeah, I had a panic attack for about a week. I was very excited. And then I talked to a writer friend of mine who handed me Stephen King's book called On Writing, which anyone learning to write is a wonderful book on writing. It's also a pretty funny biography of Stephen King. But his writing style really meshed with my brain. Before then, I was trying to really overly plot my books out, like every single step of the way of this happens, this happens, this happens, this happens. And Stephen King's writing style is basically, you have a cool concept, you have interesting characters, you have a problem, and then you let the characters solve the problem. And it's much, I have a plan when I do my books, but I definitely take big detours. And my whole process is since I don't overly plot things out, allowing those detours to happen. And it worked with Star Scouts. I got to the end of it, and I was happy with what it was, and it was well received. And the publisher continued with the series, and I got to do all 3, which was really exciting. I think initially they bought the first 2, and then they bought the 3rd one after seeing the first book. So yeah, let's see what's on my next slide here. And so at this point, my writing process is pretty much now what I learned on Star Scouts is how I write all my books now. And this is kind of like my steps. So I have my initial, 1 or 2 page story that's just a synopsis of the plot that is very vague. And then when it comes down for me to write the actual books, this is how I write them. I've tried writing scripts and I never get anywhere with it. I'm too much of a visual thinker. And so I write my books with stick figures, basically. And so this is a page from Star Scouts 2. And this is where I figure out roughly what happens on each page. And this is where I figure out my dialogue. And I kind of act this out in my head as I'm drawing my stick figures. And I do this for the entire book. So, I have 200 pages of stick figures. I send that out to my editor. And if there's any changes at this point, it's really easy to do because I haven't spent any time on this artwork. And so if we have to cut entire scenes or, I don't know, something's not funny, I don't mind just getting rid of this because, it doesn't take too long for me to make. But once the story is approved and the layouts are approved, then I go on to...
Is that guy on a toilet?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So there is a guy on the toilet up here at the top, and he's in the next page. So this is,
Oh no.
I go back through, and this is when I penciled the book where I kind of like flesh out the artwork a lot more. And the guy is still up there on the toilet, but I've done a perspective shift, but he's up there underneath Boink, and his sewer does go into the pipes that the kids get put in. I like toilet humor, and it's in almost every single book I've ever done. So I got to put in a toilet somewhere. So I go through the book and I do another pass on the art and kind of like flesh it all out. Once again, this is sent to the editor. They read it, see if it's still working or if there's anything that doesn't read well or not, or is confusing. And once that's approved, I ink it. And so I do my pencils digitally because I can edit really fast and it's easy to send it. I don't have to do any scanning to send it off to editors or anything like that. But for Star Scouts 1 and 2, I really enjoy working on paper and I miss working on paper. And so I would print out the inks on an oversized printer that I have and then ink it by hand. And this is where I get to add all the fun details. Penciling and inking are definitely my favorite parts of the book. I like adding, I'm always been like a detail person when it comes to artwork. I like adding little funny things for kids to find, like the toilet. A lot of the books have characters from other books hidden in there that I ask other cartoonists if it's okay if I do that. So I ink the whole book. Am I going too fast? I feel like I'm talking fast.
No, I think, sorry, we're not saying much here, but we're all listening intently. Not too fast.
I'm not used to doing this on a computer screen, so I can't like judge
Right.
my speed is. But yeah, so I ink the whole book, scan it in, send it to my editor. At this point, we shouldn't have anything that needs to get fixed because it's a little bit harder. It's not hard, well, it's just more time consuming to fix things at this point in the book. But if there's any small things like I forgot to draw or something that's not clear, we fix it until I do the final stage, which is coloring it. I do all my coloring digitally, usually with Photoshop, but I'm kind of changing the program I use. But this was colored in Photoshop. And this is when I just kind of put the final polish on each page. I would say it takes me about 18 months usually to do a book, depending on length. 2 years if I'm allowed to have that long. So the Star Scouts books all end up being 18 months. I think I had to do the third one in a year. And for the third book, I hired a friend to color for me because I didn't have time. I wouldn't have been able to get it done in time. But yeah.
So on your own, do you start with images or text in your mind?
You just covered that. Images.
Did he?
Yeah. So
Okay.
I start with a really simple text story that's just 2 pages long.
Okay.
And then I really write the story by drawing stick figures and drawing it out
Okay.
in my head. I've tried various scripting formats and I really don't like writing scripts. And in talking to my editors, they really appreciate that I work visually, because scripts just, I don't know, they're not that fun to read, really. I don't know. I never really liked reading plays in school. Sorry, Mom.
I mean, that's kind of the point of the graphic novel too, right? For readers who want a more visual.
Yeah. It's a visual medium. It's a visual story. And it's just how I've always
fan.
been. So yeah. And what do I have next? So yeah, I worked on the Star Scout series. That took like 5 years of my life. It was kind of shocking when I finally finished it. I'd been basically working on it for my kids' entire life, and they didn't understand what I was going to do next. Neither did I. But after finishing the Star Scout series, my publisher asked me if I would I don't actually have a slide for it, but I switched over to nonfiction. I did a book on survival skills. That was kind of a fun change for me. I love reading nonfiction, and doing graphic nonfiction is a fun thing to do. It's more of like a puzzle of like how to tell a complicated thing visually. But fiction's definitely my one true love. I'm currently working on another nonfiction book on deep sea creatures. So it's kind of nice to bounce back and forth between fiction and nonfiction, but what I'm working on.
The nonfiction is also a graphic novel?
Yeah. So I did the Maker. That publisher does a series of books called Maker Comics, and they are usually about different projects and stuff the kids can do. So mine was called Survive the Outdoors. And then the one I'm just finishing up now is in their science line, and it's on deep sea creatures. So, and they're fun. They're not like a textbook. Like my deep sea creature book is all through the perspective of two seahorses going on a famous Monsters of Filmland tour with like this kind of shady tour guide that takes them around in this beat up boat as they go deeper and deeper. And they're like kind of monster, like the fish they see are kind of like equivalents to movie monsters. And so it's kind of like a quasi horror story, but more of a science bent to it. And then, so that one's pretty much done. I just have the cover left to do on that one. So I don't have a published date on that one yet. I'm not sure when that one's coming out. And then I'm currently doing a fantasy graphic novel that is the longest book I've ever done. I actually hit my page cap and had to edit pages out of it. And for this one, I love watercolor. I learned watercolor in middle school, and then from my uncles. And then when I was in Gary's class, loved when we got to do painting and loved working in watercolor. And every now and then I would try to do a comic in watercolor, and it would just take way too long. People do it. And I've done timed tests to see how long it would take me to do a page, and I would just never finish the book. But I figured out a way to digitally kind of make something look a little bit more like watercolor. And so that's what this book, it's called Lion Hearts, and it has this kind of pencil watercolor look to it that I'm figuring out how to do digitally. And then also, since I still love printmaking, even though I don't have time for it, the book is the flashbacks are going to be told in an like engraving style, because it kind of looks old timey. And for this book, it's with a different publisher and I have a different editor, and she also has a BFA in printmaking. And when I suggested that I do my flashbacks as engravings, she got really, really excited. So I just started figuring out how I'm going to do that. But yeah, I think it looks cool. It kind of gives me this chance to show off what I learned in college, make that art degree pay for itself. But,
seems like you're doing it.
Yeah, no, it's fun. It's really slow. I'm actually like working through a flashback scene right now, and I'm like, man, this is going to take forever. Luckily, it's only like, they're just like 4-page segments, but they are really time consuming to do. But
are they actual prints, or is it just
they're
in the
digital?
style?
Yeah. No, I just kind of, but I work the same way I would with prints. And so with printmaking, you're basically, since I was doing woodcuts and engravings, every mark you make is a white line, if you're working black and white. And that's pretty much how I'm drawing this. I block in black figures and then draw digitally with white ink to kind of give that engraving kind of style to it. So yeah, it's been fun. I've never really done this before digitally, but kind of scratches that itch that I haven't really been able to I haven't had time to do prints, forever. So it's kind of nice to kind of work that way again. But yeah, so that's what I have.
Cool. Let's see. Do any of you have questions?
Well, I mean, since we're talking about careers and, I mean, how much, like when it takes you 18 months to do a graphic novel, how do you get paid and how much do you get paid? How does that process work, right? That's
Yeah.
a valid question, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
No, that's valid. Do you want me to take the slide?
Okay.
Do you want to see my face or should I leave the slide up?
Want to see his face?
Yeah.
Let's see your face.
Yeah, let's see your face.
Okay, let's see. I think I can maybe do this different.
There. Did the slide go away?
I see your name, not your face, but let me
Yeah.
make sure that's not my. Nope, I'm not seeing you. You might have to like enable your camera or something, but I don't know how to do that.
It used to be.
There you are.
There we go.
Cool.
Yeah, so how the money works for publishing. So publishers will pay you in advance. That is basically a payment for you to live off of. And it's called an advance because it's like you have to earn that back from royalties from sales of your book. And so, this is something that my agent handles for me because I'm terrible at business, but they go back and forth about how much money I'll get paid up front to live off of. And those chunks are paid in like installments. So you typically I get paid half up front and half upon completion of a book. And then every 6 months I get royalty statements that show like how many books I've sold and how much I've earned back from that advance. So yeah.
So Mike, you said you're working with a couple of different publishers.
Yeah.
And is that normal? And Portland's kind of a hot graphic town, right? There are several publishers there used to be.
Yeah, no. So there's currently 3 publishers in town: Dark Horse Comics, Image Comics, and Oni.
Okay.
Dark Horse gave me my very first job, which was a short story in an anthology, but all of the publishers that I've been putting my books out through are all based in New York.
Okay.
The publishers in town, Dark Horse and Image specifically, are more like traditional comics where they come out monthly in a floppy format.
Okay.
Since I work all my books are middle grade, like
Okay.
so it's 8 to 12-year-olds is kind of like my age range. Those all come out as graphic novels. They don't come out in like a floppy serialized format. And so those publishers are all mostly based in New York. So
And so
second was with Macmillan, and now I'm working with Abrams.
Okay. Yeah, Abrams is a good old art publisher.
Yeah, they started out as a art book publisher.
Yeah.
But they've expanded.
So, but they don't oftentimes, and I don't know the graphic world at all, but oftentimes in the book world, you kind of sign on with the publisher and you stay with that publisher, or they at least have first options on anything you do.
Yeah,
Is that pretty much the same way?
That's different. That's kind of different things that get like negotiated with each book. And so like when I signed on to do the Star Scout series, like I was just, the Star Scout series would pretty much locked in with first, second. But then like as soon I'm a freelancer, so like I don't necessarily work for that company. And so when I have a new book idea, it gets sent out to everybody. And then I get to pick, from the people that want it, I get to pick who I want to work with. And so like my current book, it came down between Abrams and Penguin. I think were the final 2 that I was trying to decide between, and I ended up going with Abrams.
So then it becomes kind of an auction for you.
Yeah. I mean, it's a
Who's
way
got the
to,
best deal?
it's a way for, yeah, for my agent to kind of like get me more money up front and get me
Yeah,
better rights on, better rates on, they go into like the nitty gritty that I don't fully understand of like how much percent I get on international books or for ebooks or hardcover
Yeah.
versus soft cover. All this stuff gets kind of worked out in minutia. And for anybody that does want to work in publishing, I do highly recommend getting an agent. They do open a lot of doors for you, and they also really understand all the nitty gritty, weird rates. And I mean, there's so much stuff that goes into these contracts that I would be completely at a loss if I was doing it on my own. I don't really have the mind for that sort of thing.
and so is your agent, does he specialize in graphic work? He or she?
She started out as a children's book agent and then was expanding into graphic novels. And so like, I think before she signed me, she had one other graphic novelist,
Okay,
James Burks. He did a series called Bird and Squirrel, which is super fun, but also kids comics. And that was around the time that middle grade comic books, like the stuff I do, really exploded. Like when the rest of the publishing world was kind of shrinking, middle grade comics were just exploding because kids love them and they're great for kids. They're kind of like a gateway book for kids that are like reluctant readers, because a kid can read a graphic novel in a day or two, and that can kind of, they'll get kind of hooked on books at that point. Yeah. But now a lot of agents now, especially for kids agents, a lot of them accept graphic novels now.
so young artists wanting to get into it, are there pathways, or do they have to find an agent first, or are there competitions, or are there?
Yeah, I mean, I think advice to any sort of like anyone that wants to get into it is you got to make something first to show people that you know what you're doing. And if you're a writer, I think it's in your interest to find an artist to work with and, self-publish a book. So you have 20 pages of art and story that you can send to people and they can read and be like, okay, they know how to tell a story visually. I think a really common mistake I see of young cartoonists is they'll do like really cool single images, like superheroes looking cool or something. That's not telling a story. You're making a cool image, but with comics, it's like you have to draw so many images. You have to have this like mindset of like telling a story, and every image can't be like the perfect show off how great of a draftsman you are. It looks cool, but it doesn't tell a good story. And so that's something that you kind of learn just from experience of like when to show off, but more importantly, how to tell a story and draw a character from every angle and have your characters have good acting. Because honestly, a dialogue scene is more important than a fight scene, even though a fight scene is infinitely more fun to draw. And that's just from experience and practice. And then to actually like submit, you can look at various literary agencies. They'll say what agents are accepting new material, and you just send them an email and you kind of pitch them real quick, basically. I think going to conventions is a good idea, but comic book conventions have gotten so big now that editors they're not really there looking for new talent as much anymore, it seems, because comic book conventions just exploded in the last 10 years. Like when I went to my first one in Portland, I sat down with multiple editors from multiple publishers face to face because it was in the tiny hotel ballroom in Portland, and it was like, I don't know, 100 tables, and now they're in convention centers. So there's just there's not as much space there to have FaceTime with people.
I had a couple questions. I noticed like that I called you a graphic novelist, but you referred to yourself as a cartoonist, and I wonder if there was a difference there, or
I think it's just I prefer cartoonist, I think, just because it's one word, graphic novelist. Okay. I don't know. Like, I've called myself a comic book artist sometimes, but then I'm like, oh, but I also write them too. And so I feel like, cartoonist is just like, I just do the whole thing for the most part.
Okay, more all encompassing. You're doing the
story. I've met different cartoonists or graphic novelists that prefer one versus the other. I think it's personal preference, but I don't think you're going to hurt anybody's feelings if you call them one or the other. And if you
Okay.
do hurt their feelings, they're taking themselves too seriously. So,
And oh, I had one other thing, because I noticed you mentioned that you had a lot of rejection, and I wondered if you had any advice for people, because I think that's a pretty, you know, in all like artistic endeavors, you inevitably run into rejection. And
Oh,
if you
yeah.
have any advice.
yeah,
Or-
rejection's just part of it. I mean, that's part of everything in life, but I think especially if you want to go into a creative field like music or drama or art or writing, a lot of people want to do it. And getting good at taking feedback and rejection is key. And one thing that it can be good in art school is that you have critiques, which can be kind of rough sometimes. You put your stuff up on the wall and everyone kind of gives you their 2 cents about it, and some people like it and some people don't. Learning how to give and take feedback like that is you just have to do it. If you get discouraged by one mean comment, if you ever do get a book out or anything like that, you're going to get a million mean comments, and you just have to, I call it my rhino skin, where I just like, I read it and I kind of laugh and be like, gotta move on. When I was starting out, my big thing is when I got handwritten rejections, that was a big deal for me. So a lot of them, you just get form letters, and then every now and then I would get like a handwritten one and I'd be like, ooh, somebody rejected me personally on this one instead of just doing the form letter.
You felt like that was more of an insult, or was it like you were a little closer to
I felt like I was a little bit closer. Like
I think so, yeah.
They took the time rather than just having their assistant just put the form letter of like, no thanks. You know, I started getting personalized rejection letters, which was like, okay, they considered me on this one.
Yeah.
But yeah, rejection is, you know, I think it still stings sometimes. I think for Star Scouts, somebody wrote like a multi-page hate letter for Star Scouts, and I was just like shocked. And I read the whole thing, and I don't know, I just like, well, they took that much time, you know, like I guess I'm flattered you spent like 2 hours writing this critique of my book, but you know, I kind of just at this point I try to learn from things. Even that 2-page hate letter for Star Scouts, they had valid points in there, and I was like, okay, I'll file that away, keep that in mind, and then move on, and don't take it personally, because, you know, I don't know if
Sure.
that would mean to give it to me personally, but you learn from it and move on. And then when you get good reviews, that's what you kind of live off of. And you're like, yeah, that person likes it, so that's more important.
Yeah. All right. I think that was a good answer. Thank
Right.
you.
Yeah, no, it's just part of it. And I think getting good at it is just putting yourself out there, getting the rejection or the feedback, and then moving on. And that's just practice, unfortunately.
Turning it into a positive. Get the positive out and let the other go, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I think most people now, they kind of like, most people know to give like the feedback sandwich, where it's like a good thing, the bad thing, and then the good thing. And so a lot of it seems to be like that. But anything that's on the internet, you know, you're just gonna, people are mean. And so with that stuff, you just got to ignore it. And don't look at Goodreads. Goodreads is the worst. If you ever are a writer, just ignore Goodreads, because that's like the worst website.
Huh.
No writer likes Goodreads. So yeah, anything else?
Oh, I was just going to add, I guess when I said positive, I don't necessarily just mean the people who like the work, but look for how you can improve yourself. Look for the positive experience in the criticism, right? Take what.
Yeah, for sure. Because like with that really long critique of Star Scouts, the valid point I took from it is that there is a theme of bullying in Star Scouts, and it does take 3 books to really resolve that. And someone only reading the first book, you don't get the full arc, because I was like, oh, well, I have this 3 books to work with. I have to tell this story. I don't want to resolve everything in the beginning. And so now something I'm a little bit more mindful of is, especially something like, since I write for kids, if there's something about bullying or something like that, it's having a better resolution for those themes that I talk about in my books, if that comes up, and not letting that take 3 books to finish. And now that all 3 books are out, if someone likes it, they can just read the whole series and be like, oh yeah, he did address the bullying aspect, and I hopefully addressed it well. But someone reading it and then they have to wait 2 years for the next book to come out, they think I'm just going to be like, yeah, there's bullies and that's it, no resolution. So I learned from it.
Sure. My husband says that. He's like, all those 80s movies just made me expect bullies in school. So I think like thinking about,
Yeah, it's a different world.
how that's affecting. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike. Unless we have other questions. No. Well, I think we're looking forward to,
The participants that aren't here,
we don't have any way to communicate with them.
there's
So
no chat box?
we don't have a chat because it's through YouTube Live. So,
Oh, okay.
but Mike, we're expecting to see you at the opening for the Wishart exhibit, right? So
Yeah.
maybe some of those questions can be asked then.
Yeah,
if
no,
you
I'm
don't
really
mind.
looking forward to it.
Okay, yeah, me too. That'll be, like you said, it'll be like a big reunion, so.
For sure.
All right, well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
All right, no
you.
problem.
see you in a week.